Some of the deepest betrayals don't come from harsh words, but from the people who saw your heart clearly and pretended they didn't. The snow had already begun falling when Mira Jacobs stepped into the elevator for the last time. She didn't cry, not when the doors slid shut, not when the descent to the ground floor began, and not when the soft chimes signaled her final exit from Magnus Corporation. She held her coat in one arm, resignation letter in the other. No one stopped her. When she reached the lobby, the warmth inside the glass tower felt almost cruel. Its gleaming floors, its curated elegance, its quiet hush, they all looked exactly the same. But something had ended, and not just her job. Through the revolving door, the city was covered in a thin layer of white, fresh snow. Everything looked softer out there, while inside, her entire world had hardened. Behind her, the elevator still hadn't moved. Jace Remington stood alone, 23 floors up, the letter she'd left on his desk sitting unopened. She had handed it to him directly. His hands took it, but his eyes never lifted. When she turned to go, he didn't follow. Not a word, not a question, just the familiar silence he always used to stay safe. She pushed the door and stepped into the cold. The wind bit through her coat, but she didn't wrap it tighter. She didn't flinch. Her heels crunched against slush as she walked toward the subway. A December night in Newfield always demanded attention, but Mira had none left to give. She opened her phone. One last time. There it was, drafted, unsent. I wasn't asking you to announce us. I was asking you to see me. She hovered for a second, thumb trembling over the screen. Then she deleted the message. No parting words, no dramatic exit. She chose to leave the way she stayed, quietly, honestly, and without begging to be understood. 3 years earlier, it had started with a look. Mira had been giving a late afternoon presentation. Most of the room had already left, their eyes more focused on their phones than the quarterly reports. But Jace stayed. He didn't interrupt, didn't even comment. He just watched. The next day, he asked her to revise the budget breakdown, not because it was wrong, but because he wanted her input on something bigger. He liked how her mind worked, he said. Her focus. From then on, they started working late. She brought takeout. He made coffee. Slowly, the gap between them became a space they both stepped into. Nothing was ever defined. No labels. No acknowledgements. Not even a whispered admission behind glass doors. But it was there, in how his gaze lingered when she walked into meetings, in how their schedules conveniently aligned, in the near touch of their hands when they reviewed presentations. Once, after a late client dinner, their driver was late. They waited in the cold. Jace had taken off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You shouldn't have to ask to be warm," he said quietly. She remembered that line. She'd let it mean more than it did. Weeks turned into months. Then came the trip to Chicago, a conference, a suite booked last minute, 2 rooms joined by a door neither of them used. She slept in her own bed, but the silence between them was filled with a kind of closeness she hadn't known before. They never crossed the line, but it was still a relationship, unspoken, fragile, and invisible to everyone but her. She had never asked him for a label. All she wanted was recognition, a trace of honesty in the daylight. It was a Friday when everything cracked. The department had hit their target early. Spirits were high. The senior team went out to celebrate at a downtown lounge, including Mira and Jace. The teasing began when one colleague, half drunk, grinned and said, "So, is it true our fearless CEO has a favorite strategist?" Mira. "Should we be jealous?" Laughter followed. Harmless, they thought. She smiled, ready to brush it off. But Jace's voice cut through the noise. "Don't be ridiculous," he said sharply. "Let's not make things awkward." And just like that, Mira disappeared. Not from the room, not from the table, but from the shared story they'd both lived for almost a year. She sat frozen. Her face didn't change. She didn't excuse herself or lash out, but something in her shifted, quietly, permanently. That night, back at the office, she waited outside his door. The building was nearly empty. Most people had gone home. She had one last question. "Do you really think it's ridiculous?" she asked, arms crossed tightly against her ribs. Jace didn't stand up. He leaned back in his chair, watching her the way he used to, calm, unreadable. "You're reading too much into things, Mira," he said. She blinked, slowly. "You don't get to decide how I feel," she answered, then placed the envelope on his desk. When he didn't move, didn't even shift in his chair, she turned and walked out. She didn't speak to anyone on her way down. No goodbyes, no warning. And still, no one stopped her, not even him. She sat on the train that night, staring at the reflection of her own face against the dark window. Some breakups happen with doors slamming. Some happen with screaming. This one happened with an unanswered look and a closed elevator. Her phone buzzed, a message from a friend checking in. She responded with a simple, "I'm good. Just needed to leave before I forgot who I was." That was the truth. Not dramatic, not bitter, just overdue. 1 hour later, Mira stood in her apartment, lights off, coat still on. The quiet was heavy, but it wasn't empty. She didn't regret walking out. But she did grieve the version of herself who kept waiting for someone else to validate what was already real. Her phone lit up once more. No name, no message, just silence. And this time, she didn't check it. She turned off the screen and let the snow keep falling outside her window, knowing that something inside her had finally stopped waiting. When Mira packed her office the next morning, she arrived early, before sunrise. No one was there yet. She didn't want an audience. She had no desire to see her nameplate, her desk plant, or the stack of printed agendas from meetings where her ideas were presented without credit. She moved quickly, placing everything into a single box. Her laptop was wiped, her drawer emptied. The photo of her and her younger brother from college, one of the only personal items on her desk, went in last. There was something about the silence that morning that made her feel not invisible, but unburdened. For the first time in months, she didn't have to brace herself for indifference. She left her ID badge on the desk, and when the elevator doors opened, one final time, she didn't look back. Later that week, Mira sat with her best friend Kelsey at a tiny brunch spot near East Pine. It was one of the few places in Newfield untouched by corporate crowds. "You serious?" Kelsey asked after hearing the full story. No outburst, no closure, not even a call afterward. Mira stirred her coffee slowly. "He never looked up when I handed him the letter." "Coward," Kelsey muttered. "No," Mira said quietly. "Just unwilling." She didn't need to demonize Jace. That would make the whole thing simpler than it was. He hadn't been cruel. He hadn't made promises he didn't keep. He had simply refused to see her clearly. And maybe that hurt more. "I didn't want a spotlight," Mira continued. "But I wanted truth, even if it was small. Even if he just said, 'Yes, I care, but I can't be what you need.' Anything would have been better than pretending nothing happened." Kelsey nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "So what now?" Mira looked out the window. Boston, new role, new everything. The job offer came from a non-profit organization that supported young women in tech. Mira had volunteered with them years ago, on weekends, after long workdays at Magnus. Back then, it had been a passion project. Now, it would become her purpose. Her first day in Boston came with rain and a shaky start. The apartment was smaller, the neighborhood quieter. Her title no longer carried the shine of prestige. But something about it felt right. At the non-profit, she wasn't Mira the potential partner, or Mira the upcoming executive. She was simply Mira, the one who listened, who understood pressure, who knew what it felt like to be brilliant, and dismissed in the same breath. The girls loved her, especially Ava. Ava Remington had been 16 that summer, reserved but razor-smart, the kind of teenager who avoided eye contact but absorbed everything. Mira took to her instantly. They talked often, about tech, school, and the strange loneliness of always being the responsible one. Ava had opened up slowly. Her family was complicated, she said once. Her uncle was her guardian. He provided everything, but never asked questions that mattered. "You ever feel like you're just part of someone's reputation? Ava had whispered one afternoon. Mira had paused before answering. Yes, I stayed in that place too long, but I walked away. The girl hadn't asked for details, but she'd nodded, quietly. Back in Newfield, Mira's absence at Magnus was barely mentioned in official memos. The projects she led were reassigned. Her name disappeared from executive decks. New hires didn't know who she was. But 2 weeks after her departure, Jace sat alone in his corner office well past midnight, reading the draft of an email he never sent. It was short, 6 lines, no title. I should have said something, but I didn't know how without unraveling everything I thought I had to be. I know you don't owe me anything, but I saw you. I just wasn't brave enough to show it. He hit delete. In Boston, Mira stopped checking LinkedIn. She poured herself into her work. She joined Saturday workshops. She started teaching beginner programming courses at a local college. She bought a bike. Little by little, she stopped waking up with the urge to prove anything. Then, one afternoon, she passed a bookstore downtown and paused. The window displayed a stack of leadership books. One of them had Jace Remington's name on the spine. She didn't walk in. She didn't need to. Years passed. Seasons came and went. Her phone changed. Her hair grew longer. Her heart healed. Not because someone apologized, but because she made different choices. And still, some nights, especially the snowy ones, Mira would feel it. That soft ache behind her ribs. The one that asked, what if he had just said something true? But the ache never pulled her backward. It reminded her how far she'd come. Then came the Thursday. The receptionist at her office, Lana, peeked into her shared workspace, eyes hesitant. Hey, Mira, there's someone in the lobby asking for you. Mira stood up, brushing a smudge of ink off her hand. A parent? No, a man. Mid-30s. Looks like he's been out in the rain. Said his name is... Lana hesitated. Jace Remington? The name struck Mira in the chest like a sudden wind. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, calmly, without emotion, she said, I'll be right there. When she reached the lobby, her breath caught. Jace was sitting on the edge of a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, coat damp, hair slightly out of place. No assistant, no laptop bag, no air of control. He looked up, and for the first time in their entire history, he looked unsure. Hi, he said. Mira crossed her arms. You came all this way? I didn't know who else to ask, he replied. It's about Ava. Mira blinked. Ava? He nodded. She's 17 now. She's in boarding school upstate. Last night she disappeared. She left a note. She mentioned you. Her pulse kicked up. She said, You listened. Mira steadied herself. I haven't seen her, but I might know where she'd go. Jace stood. Will you come with me? She paused. Then, yes, but not for you. For her. I know. They drove in silence. The rain hadn't stopped since morning. Windshield wipers swept across the glass with dull repetition. Mira kept her eyes forward, fingers lightly resting on her lap. Jace gripped the wheel, occasionally glancing at the GPS, then back at the road. The address she'd given him wasn't far, an old brick building that used to be a music hall, turned after-school arts center, and then, due to lack of funding, abandoned again. Mira had taken Ava there once, years ago, after a summer workshop. Ava had said she liked how the place didn't feel loud with pressure. She remembered that phrase clearly. Back then, she understood it more than Ava realized. You sure this is the place? Jace asked, voice low. No, Mira answered, but if she needed quiet, it's where I'd go. He nodded, kept driving. The heater in the car was broken. Mira didn't mention it, but she noticed. Not because she felt cold, but because she noticed everything now, what people said and what they didn't. She studied Jace in her peripheral view. His hair was shorter. There were lines around his eyes he didn't used to have. His jaw was clenched, but his voice was softer than she remembered. Still, none of it moved her the way it once might have. Her heart didn't beat faster. It just stayed, aware. 3 years ago, this man had been the center of her ambition, confusion, and quiet pain. Now he was a passenger in a space she built without him. She didn't owe him warmth, but she didn't feel anger either. Just clarity. "You ever think about reaching out?" he asked quietly. She turned toward him. "Is that a question about you or about me?" His grip on the wheel tightened slightly. "About both, I guess." "I didn't," she said simply. "Not because I didn't care, but because I learned not to chase silence." He nodded once. "I thought about it," he admitted. "A few times." "What stopped you?" His mouth curved in a pained smile. "Pride, fear, stupid things." Mira looked back out the window. "Those aren't small things. They shape lives." They arrived 10 minutes later. The building looked as Mira remembered, dark, quiet, half forgotten. A rusty gate leaned open. The parking lot was empty. Jace parked, turned off the engine, and exhaled deeply. "You want me to wait in the car?" he asked. Mira hesitated. "No. If she's here, she'll see you didn't send someone else." He nodded again and stepped out. They walked in silence toward the side entrance. Mira pulled out her old volunteer key. It still worked. The hallway smelled of dust and winter air. When they reached the back room, Mira stopped and listened. Music. Faint. The soft, shaky sound of someone pressing piano keys slowly, uncertainly. Mira stepped inside first. Ava sat at the old upright piano, earbuds out, head slightly bowed, fingers moving over the keys like she wasn't really playing, just remembering. She looked up and froze. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Ava's voice, barely above a whisper. "You remembered this place." Mira gave a soft smile. "Always." Ava stood abruptly, wiping at her eyes. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. I needed to breathe." Mira walked over slowly and sat on the bench beside her. "You're not in trouble. We just want to know you're okay." Ava looked past her at Jace. "He doesn't ask questions." "I'm asking now," Jace said, stepping forward. Ava's lip trembled. Mira gently placed a hand over hers. "You don't have to explain everything, but maybe tell us what you need." A long pause. Then, "I didn't run away. I just stepped out." "From what?" Mira asked softly. "Being perfect. Being quiet. Being the reason no one worries." They stayed in that room for over an hour. Jace didn't dominate the conversation. He didn't give advice or fix anything. He listened. Mira watched him and felt something unfamiliar. Surprise. He wasn't performing. He was present. When Ava finally agreed to call her school counselor, Jace left the room to give her privacy. Mira followed a few minutes later, finding him sitting on the steps outside. "You did good in there," she said. He looked up. "I didn't say much." "Exactly." They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Jace turned toward her, eyes tired. "I never told you I was sorry." Mira held his gaze. "That's true. I didn't know how. I thought saying something would make it worse." "Silence made it worse," she replied. His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know how to choose you without losing everything I thought I had to be. And now?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Now I know I lost something anyway." Ava came out then, school counselor on the line. Arrangements were being made. She would go back to school tonight. No drama, no headlines. Jace stood and waited for her to come over. When she did, he opened his arms slowly. She stepped in. It wasn't long, but it was honest. As they walked toward the car, Jace opened the passenger door for Mira, but she paused. "You said you were sorry," she said. "But what are you actually sorry for?" He blinked. "For not seeing you clearly. For protecting my image more than I protected your trust." She nodded. "Then thank you, because now I finally understand that I deserved more." He didn't argue, didn't explain, just stood there. And for the first time, Mira saw that maybe he had changed, not into someone she owed a future to, but into someone who could finally understand why she left. The ride back was quiet. This time, Mira let her head lean slightly toward the window. Her reflection was faint, but clear enough for her to notice something strange. She didn't feel tense around Jace. Not comfortable, but not bound either. That was new. She glanced toward him briefly. His hands gripped the steering wheel like he was holding more than the road, like he didn't trust himself to speak yet. Mira didn't help fill the silence. She had learned over time that the right words came only when people sat with their wrong ones long enough. They pulled up in front of her office just after 9. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened, catching the gold hue of the overhead lights. Mira reached for the door handle, pausing when Jace finally spoke. "Do you think she'll be okay?" She turned slightly. Ava's not afraid to speak. That's rare for girls her age. She just needs to know someone will listen when she does. Jace nodded slowly. "I didn't listen to you." Mira didn't answer that. Not directly. Instead, she said, "Most people don't realize they're quiet until they meet someone who isn't afraid to speak." Her hand touched the door again. "Mira," he said quickly. She looked at him. "I'm not asking to fix anything," he said, his voice almost hesitant. "But if I wanted to ask you questions I should have asked years ago, would you let me?" She didn't smile, but her tone softened. "I'm not the same woman you remember. I know. I don't need closure, Jace," she added. "I need clarity. Then let me give you that, even if it's late." She didn't answer that night, but 3 days later, she sent a single-line reply to his message, Tuesday. Corner of Hopewell and Juniper. 4 p.m. No crowd. No performance. The cafe was small, barely seating more than a dozen. No branding. No flashy decor. Just wood, light and quiet. When Mira walked in, she saw him already seated near the back. No laptop, no phone on the table. Just a cup of tea and his fingers threaded loosely together. He stood when she approached, but didn't try to hug her. She appreciated that. "I didn't think you'd come," he said once they both sat. "I almost didn't," she answered. "But I've spent enough time learning how to leave. I wanted to remind myself that I also know how to face things." They ordered tea for him again, chamomile for her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jace reached into his coat pocket and set a sealed envelope on the table. "I wrote this a year ago," he said. "Didn't have the guts to send it." Mira stared at it. "You don't have to read it now," he added. "I just needed you to know that silence doesn't mean I forgot. It meant I didn't know how to admit what I ruined." She lifted it slowly. "You think silence protects people. It doesn't. It makes them wonder if they ever mattered." "I know that now," he said. Mira didn't open the envelope. Not yet. She tucked it into her bag and leaned back. "Why now?" she asked. "Why show up again? Why Ava?" Jace looked down at the table. She started asking questions I never knew how to answer, about pressure, about being seen, about what to do when people love you in ways you don't understand yet. He exhaled deeply, and every time she asked, "I saw your face." Mira watched him quietly. "I should have told you," he continued. "I saw you every single day, and I knew what we had, even if I refused to name it." "You didn't have to name it," Mira said calmly. "You just had to not deny it. That's where the damage was done." He winced. "I didn't think I could be that vulnerable and still lead. I thought love was weakness, that you were too close to where people could see me clearly." "You were afraid I could expose you," Mira said, without accusation. "But I never wanted to harm you. I just wanted to belong somewhere you didn't hide me." She stirred her tea. The spoon clinked softly. "I didn't know how to offer that," he admitted. "You didn't try," she corrected. "You were good at intimacy in silence, but not in daylight." There was no anger in her voice, no tremble, just truth. He sat back, nodding slowly. "I want to understand who you are now," he said. "Not to earn anything back, but because I missed too much of you before." Mira tilted her head slightly. "I'm not looking for an apology tour, Jace. I don't need you to perform redemption. I just want the truth. If you can give me that, we can have coffee." He smiled, barely. "Deal." They talked for another hour, not about the past, not yet, but about now. Mira told him about her girls at the non-profit, the ones who reminded her of herself at 15, sharp but always second-guessing their own worth. Jace listened. He asked real questions, and when he finally stood to leave, he didn't offer to walk her out. He simply said, "Thank you for sitting with me." Mira nodded. "Next time," she replied, "ask what I think before you decide what I need." He held her gaze for a moment, then left. That night, she opened the letter. It wasn't long. A few paragraphs, some memories, some mistakes, no grand declarations. But there was one line that stayed with her. "You deserved someone who wasn't afraid to be seen standing next to you, and I chose to disappear instead." She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of her nightstand, not to hold on to the past, but to remember what clarity sounds like. The following Tuesday, Jace showed up again. This time, it wasn't at the non-profit. It wasn't at Mira's favorite cafe. It was at the local community tech fair she helped organize every spring, an event full of school tables, open laptops, and clusters of young girls in bright-colored hoodies explaining projects to judges and volunteers. Mira saw him before he saw her. He wore a navy sweater, not a suit. No press badge, no security, no assistant. He stood by the robotics booth, hands in his pockets, nodding along as a girl explained how she used a motion sensor to mimic human movement in a toy cat. He smiled when she finished. Genuine. Mira's throat tightened, not from attraction, not from regret, from recognition. He was trying. Later, she caught up with him near the volunteer table. "Didn't expect you here," she said, voice neutral. "I asked Ava what mattered to her. She said this." Mira nodded once. "She's right." They stood in the middle of the gym, surrounded by bright banners and excited voices. Yet in that moment, it felt quiet between them. "You free after this?" he asked. She paused. They walked 2 blocks to a small bench beneath a tree that hadn't yet bloomed. Mira liked this spot, quiet, close to campus, tucked between 2 old bookstores. She sat first. He waited until she settled before joining her. He didn't rush the conversation. She noticed that. "So," she said, "what do you want to ask me?" He gave a small breath of a laugh. "I wrote a list, actually. Then I realized that's not the point." She waited. Jace leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Back then, did you think I ever cared?" Mira's brow lifted slightly. "That's your first question?" He nodded. She didn't rush her answer. "I knew you cared. That wasn't the problem." He looked confused. "I didn't need your affection," she continued. "I needed your courage. And when you refused to bring both into the same room, I had to leave." Jace rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't realize how much fear I lived in." "You led entire teams," she said. "You ran boardrooms, you negotiated contracts with confidence, but the one time you were asked to be seen emotionally, you called it ridiculous." "I was embarrassed," he said. "Not of you, of myself, of how little I understood about being close to someone without controlling how they were seen." Mira looked away. "You made me feel like I was a risk." "You weren't," he said quickly. "You were the only real thing I had at that point." "Then, why didn't you say that?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "Because I thought saying it would make me weak." "No," she said, looking him dead in the eyes. "It would have made you worthy." They sat in silence again. Wind rustled the edges of the paper flyer she held in her lap. An old woman passed by, nodding politely. Jace turned toward her. "I'm not asking for a second chance, but I need you to know I see it now. Everything you gave, everything I ignored." Mira nodded slowly. "I accept that," she said. "But accepting isn't the same as opening a door." "I know, and I'm not offering you anything." "I'm not asking," he replied. For the first time, they both smiled. Barely, but honestly. Later that night, Mira journaled. Something she hadn't done in a long while. She wrote about how strange it felt to speak without holding her breath. How she no longer filtered her words for someone else's ego. She wrote, "When people say they miss you, what they sometimes mean is that they miss who you were when you didn't ask for more." She closed the journal, feeling light. The next morning, Jace sent her a text. Not romantic, not heavy. Just, would you mind if I volunteered at the center once a week? No agenda. I want to understand what you've built. She stared at the message for a moment, then replied, you can come Wednesdays. One condition, you don't talk. You listen. His reply came quickly. Deal. That Wednesday, he showed up 15 minutes early. Mira noticed from the window as she prepped for the after-school program. He wore jeans, a plain grey t-shirt, and brought coffee for the front desk staff, but not for her. Smart, she thought. When the girls arrived, he didn't hover. He helped stack chairs, moved tables, ran cables, didn't interrupt. At one point, Ava smirked and whispered to Mira, he looks terrified of all the middle school energy. Mira smiled. Good. Keeps him humble. When the day ended, Jace packed up quietly and waited for a brief moment to speak with her. Did I pass? He asked. You stayed, she said. That's a start. Then she added, don't show up next week expecting approval. Show up willing to earn trust by being consistent. He nodded. You won't have to remind me. Mira walked home that night without needing music or distraction. The air was crisp. Her steps were steady. She wasn't falling in love again. She was watching someone rebuild their character. And this time, she wasn't carrying the weight of making it work. Jace showed up again the next week. No coffee, no fanfare. He signed in at the desk, asked where he could help, and joined the logistics volunteers without needing Mira's approval. That alone told her everything she needed to know about where he was emotionally. He wasn't performing. He wasn't chasing. He was simply present. One of the girls, Amani, kept looking at him from the corner of the room. She was 13, sharp-tongued, and suspicious of most adults. When she asked Mira if that guy was some kind of consultant, Mira responded, he's someone learning how to listen better. Amani blinked. Does he talk much? Not yet. Good, she said. Talking men are usually disappointing. Mira didn't laugh. But she did write the quote down later that night in her journal. By the third week, Jace had learned how to coil wires without being asked. He helped the shy students with microphone testing. He stayed afterward to clean up, always waiting until Mira gave the signal that she didn't mind speaking. That afternoon, she sat with him on the back steps behind the building, where the old wood creaked under their weight and the smell of chalk lingered in the air. You weren't like this at Magnus, she said plainly. I didn't know I could be, he replied. Mira turned to him. That's not an excuse. That's a confession. He nodded, accepting that. I was trained to lead with control, he said. I thought admitting uncertainty made me weak, that emotions were risks that someone else had to carry for me. You never cried at work. I did, she said. You were always braver than me. No, I was always more willing to lose everything to keep my integrity. You were willing to lose people to protect your image. The words hung heavy between them. Jace didn't argue. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said, that was the cost, and I paid it. Later that week, Mira met with her therapist, Dr. Lynn, a calm, perceptive woman in her 50s who didn't let sentiment get in the way of truth. After Mira explained the new dynamic with Jace, Dr. Lynn asked, what do you want from this interaction? I don't know, Mira admitted. Nothing, I think. Maybe just honesty. Maybe proof that I didn't imagine the connection we had, that I wasn't the fool I feared I was. Dr. Lynn nodded. So you're not seeking reconciliation. You're seeking evidence. That's a sharp way to put it, but accurate. Mira sat in silence. Then, I think I want to know if I mattered outside of the image he built for himself. Would his answer change your life today? No, but I'd like to see him carry the question for once. That Sunday, Jace sent a message. Not long. I don't want to repeat patterns, but I do want to ask, would you meet me again? No pressure, no agenda, just a walk. Mira thought about it for an hour, then typed, only if we speak plainly. No image, no history, just real words. They met at the river trail, where the trees had just started blooming. Mira wore flats and no makeup. Jace wore sneakers and a windbreaker. They looked nothing like they once had. They walked in silence for 5 minutes before she said, "You told me you were afraid. What exactly were you afraid of?" He didn't answer immediately. She gave him time. "I was afraid that if I loved you openly, people would question everything about me, my leadership, my judgment, my strength. I was afraid I would lose the board's respect, afraid that admitting my feelings would unravel my control. And now?" she asked. "I still feel afraid sometimes, but I know what it cost me to protect the wrong things." Mira stopped walking, faced him. "You cost me my sense of safety," she said. "Not because you hurt me directly, but because you taught me that love can be real and still be invisible when it threatens someone's comfort." "I know. I spent years wondering if I'd imagined it all. Because if it was real, why didn't you say something?" His voice was quiet. "Because I thought silence was safer than vulnerability." "For who?" she snapped. "For me," he admitted. "And the rest of us?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "Collateral." The word stung, because it was true, and he didn't try to dress it up. "Thank you," she said, "for finally telling the truth." They kept walking. This time, when their shoulders brushed, Mira didn't move away. Later that night, Mira called her brother, Evan. They hadn't spoken in weeks, but he always knew when to ask the right questions. "You sound calm," he said. "I am. And I'm proud of myself," she answered. "That's new. I used to think the win was getting him to see me. Now I know the real win is never needing that to define me again." Evan exhaled into the phone. "That's growth, sis." "Yeah." Mira journaled again before bed. She wrote, "You can't always change the past, but you can ask the questions it was built to avoid. And when the answers come, you're not a victim anymore. You're the witness." At the next Wednesday session, Jace showed up with a portable speaker and a folding cart full of supplies. He didn't ask Mira where to set up. He asked the students. And when one of the younger girls said, "You look less stiff now," he laughed and said, "That's the best review I've had in years." Mira watched from a distance. She didn't feel flutters. She felt something better. Peace. Have you ever been hurt by someone who said nothing when it mattered most? What did you do with the silence? Did you wait, walk away, or speak the truth anyway? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're still learning how to speak your needs without guilt, you're not alone. Subscribe to Romance Stories with Mr. Daniel for more stories that reflect real decisions, real growth, and real consequences. Saturday mornings at the center were quieter. Fewer students came in, mostly those preparing for competitions or working on independent projects. Mira liked this time. No rush, no big personalities trying to prove themselves. Just effort, patience, and quiet improvement. When she arrived just after 8, Jace was already there. He was in the multi-purpose room, laying out extension cords and rearranging chairs with one of the older volunteers. No one had asked him. He just knew the drill now. She stood by the door for a moment and watched. He didn't see her. He wiped dust off the whiteboard, tested the HDMI cord, set up the projector, spoke with the girls respectfully, never interrupting, always waiting for instruction. This wasn't the man who used to orchestrate boardroom presentations with military precision and require 5 people to prep his speaking notes. This was someone else. Someone lighter. Or maybe just someone less afraid to be small in a room. Later that morning, Amani asked Mira quietly, "You sure he wasn't a principal or something?" Mira raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "He's different. He listens like we're all experts. That's because some of you are." Amani smirked. "You dating him?" "No. Why not?" Mira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she said, "Because presence needs time to prove it isn't just performance." Amani blinked. "That's a lot of P words." Mira smiled. "You'll understand them later." At noon, most of the girls had gone home. Jace stayed back to help break down the equipment. As he rolled up cords, Mira joined him in the storage closet, checking the bins. "You've been consistent," she said plainly. "I told you I would be." She nodded. A lot of people make promises they think sound right. They disappear when it no longer feels necessary. He paused, resting a folded cable on the shelf. I disappear when I feel seen, he said. That's what I used to do. Now, I stay. Mira closed the lid on a bin. You're not showing off anymore. That's good. I used to think visibility was everything. And now, he looked at her. Now I know showing up without being flashy is harder. After cleanup, they walked out to the street together. The air was brisk, early spring pretending it was still late winter. The sidewalk was half shadowed, half sunlit. Want to get lunch? He asked. Mira glanced at him. Friendly or reflective? He smiled. No pressure, just hungry. She considered. All right, but I choose the spot. They ended up at a tiny Ethiopian place Mira had loved for years. No menus. You just said how hungry you were and let the kitchen decide. They sat at a small corner table, the kind where elbows might brush if you weren't paying attention. I haven't had food like this in years, Jace said, studying the soft injera and colorful vegetable dishes on the shared platter. That's what happens when your diet revolves around catered boardrooms. He laughed. Guilty. Mira dipped a piece of injera into the lentils. Do you ever miss it? The power, the status, the performance. Jace chewed thoughtfully. I miss knowing exactly how to be admired, but I don't miss how empty I felt afterward. That's honest. He nodded. I'm trying to be. Mira tilted her head. I like this version of you. Not because I trust it yet, but because it's not asking me to. They talked about Boston next, what she liked, what still felt unfamiliar. He listened closely when she mentioned her old apartment's creaky pipes and how she'd learned to fix them herself. You always found a way to work around systems, he said. No, she corrected gently. I just stopped waiting for systems to work for me. After the meal, they didn't rush to leave. Instead, they sat with the quiet space between them. Not awkward, just reflective. I keep remembering little things, Jace said. From before, like what? He looked at her. How you used to bring 2 pens to meetings, one for yourself and one extra in case someone needed one. You always sat closest to the projector, not because it was the best seat, but because it meant you had to explain less. Mira blinked. He continued, You gave without asking for credit. And I took without realizing the cost of being the one who stays silent. She didn't say anything right away, but when she spoke, her voice was soft. I gave because I believed you saw me. I did, but seeing and choosing aren't the same. He nodded. I didn't have the spine to choose you then. Mira looked out the window. I didn't leave because you didn't choose me. I left because I couldn't keep waiting for someone to decide if I mattered. The waiter brought the bill. Jace reached for it, but Mira put her hand on his. I invited you. I'll pay. He looked surprised, then respectful. All right. Outside, the wind had picked up again. As they walked toward her car, he stopped her. Mira. She turned slightly. I don't expect anything. I know. But if ever there's a time you choose to let someone walk beside you again, I'd like to be considered. She didn't answer with words. She simply said, then keep walking. We'll see where the path leads. And they walked in silence, side by side. No rush, no promises, just a shared pace on even ground. The next Wednesday, Mira arrived at the center early to unlock the rooms. As she moved through the halls turning on lights, she noticed something new. On the bulletin board near the entrance, one of the students had pinned a handmade flyer. A good leader doesn't talk over you. He pulls up a chair. Ava R. Below it, another girl had scribbled in colored pen, like Mr. J. Mira paused. Her eyes lingered on the paper, not because of the names, but because of what it meant. They were watching. These girls noticed presence, not titles, not authority, not credentials. She smiled faintly and moved on. By the time the girls filed in, Jace had already set up the projector. He greeted them all by name, never loud, never overconfident, just steady. He never tried to teach. He simply assisted, helped fix tech hiccups, fetched extra power cords, and followed the girls' lead. When Amani presented her project on video game design, she asked Jace if he'd test it. Everyone in the room tensed slightly. Amani didn't invite adults easily. Jace sat down, played the game, and when it glitched halfway through, he didn't laugh or point it out. He looked up and asked, "Where do you want the next level to go?" Amani beamed. Later that day, Mira pulled Jace aside. They stood by the supply room, where the hum of a heater filled the silence. "You're learning to let people lead," she said. "I should have learned that sooner." She tilted her head. "Maybe. But some lessons are only learned through loss." Jace met her gaze. "What did I lose, Mira?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, the version of me who would have fought for someone too scared to stand beside her, he exhaled. "I miss her." "You should," she said. "She was generous. She deserved more. I didn't know how to receive that kind of love. And now, I don't expect it. I respect it." Mira nodded. That was the closest he'd ever come to earning her trust again. That weekend, the non-profit hosted a community open house. Parents were invited. Former students returned. Mira gave a short speech, thanking the team for their consistency and the girls for their brilliance. Jace stood at the back, unnoticed by most, clapping softly. When Ava introduced her uncle to a few of her peers, she said, "This is Jace. He doesn't fix things, but he shows up." Mira caught the comment and smiled. Jace looked stunned for a second, then said, "That might be the best compliment I've ever received." After the event, Mira stayed late to pack up materials. Jace offered to help. They loaded boxes into her car in silence. "Want to walk a bit?" she asked after. He nodded. They strolled through the quiet residential streets near the school. Spring hung in the air, not quite visible yet, but close enough to sense. As they walked, Jace spoke. "When I think about who I was 3 years ago, I barely recognize him." Mira glanced over. "That's what growth does. I used to believe the only way to keep something was to control it. And now I understand that the things worth keeping grow when you loosen your grip." They walked on. A porch light flickered. Somewhere, wind chimes sang softly. "Why did you come back?" Mira asked. He paused. "I didn't come back for a second chance. I came back because something Ava said shook me." "What was it?" She said, "You lead loud, but you love quiet. That's why people feel alone around you." Mira inhaled sharply. Jace continued, "I didn't want her to grow up thinking that kind of presence was normal. I needed to become someone who doesn't disappear when people get close." Mira stopped walking. She looked him in the eye. "That's why I left, Jace. You weren't there." "Not really. I'm here now. I see that." They stood under a street lamp, light casting soft shadows around them. "I'm not ready to promise anything," she said. "I'm not asking." "Good. But if I ever earn the chance, I want to be someone who doesn't need a second chance to get it right." Mira gave a small smile. "Then don't try to win me. Just keep showing up. As you are, I can do that." They stood there, two changed people, no longer chasing closure, no longer seeking control. Just present. The next morning, Mira woke early. For the first time in years, she didn't wake thinking about what could have been. She thought about what was, not perfect, not promised, but possible. Mira didn't expect to run into anyone from Magnus Corp in Boston. She had closed that door clean. No LinkedIn updates, no overlapping contacts, no mutual events. It was a world she had let go of, and one that frankly had never looked back. So when she saw Delia Hartman standing in line at the Saturday farmers market, arms full of sunflowers and that unmistakable clipped accent, her breath caught. Delia hadn't changed. Still polished, still 5 steps ahead of the rumor mill, still observant. "Mira?" Delia said, blinking in surprise. "Oh wow. How long has it been?" Mira gave a composed smile. "About 3 years." Delia looked her over. "You look grounded." "I am." They stepped out of the line together. It was one of those encounters you didn't plan for but couldn't avoid. Delia walked beside her, their pace light, the air warm. "So," Delia began, "I heard about you and Jace." Mira paused. Delia smiled like it was harmless gossip. Don't worry. It wasn't a scandal, just whispers. The prodigy strategist who walked out quietly. And now he's volunteering at your center? Mira kept walking. He volunteers with students. That's all. Sure, Delia said lightly, but still, must feel good. Being the one he circled back to, the one who changed him, Mira stopped, turned toward her. Delia, she said calmly, I didn't win anything. He's not a prize. And I didn't show up to fix or change him. I left because I had to protect myself. Whatever's happening now, it's not about payback, it's about presence. Delia's expression wavered. I just meant, I know what you meant, Mira said gently, but firmly. But don't confuse survival with strategy. I didn't play a game. I walked away from one. Delia didn't respond right away. Then, well, good for you. Mira nodded. Thanks. Take care. She walked away without looking back. That afternoon, Jace met her at the center to help prep for the spring showcase. He was waiting by the front doors with Ava, holding a box of stage lights. Ava ran inside with the box. Jace stayed behind. You all right? He asked. Ran into someone from Magnus. Jace's posture stiffened. Who? Delia. She assumed I won something by you showing up again. He didn't say anything. Mira folded her arms. You want to know what I told her? He nodded. I told her I didn't win. I left. And what's happening now has nothing to do with redemption stories. His shoulders relaxed. Thank you, he said. For what? For not letting anyone else define us. Not even now. Later, as they unpacked art materials for the showcase, Mira caught Jace watching Ava across the room. She was joking with another student, relaxed, confident, free. You did good with her, Mira said softly. Jace looked at her. I didn't. But I'm trying to now. You're showing up. That matters. She always reminds me of you, he said. Mira turned to him. How so? Smart, protective, always scanning the room for the person who feels unseen. She didn't respond. But she felt the truth of it. After the session, they walked out together. This time, it was Mira who reached for her scarf when the wind picked up. You know what I hate about comments like Delia's? She said, as they turned the corner. They frame women's healing as someone else's character arc. Mira blinked. Exactly. She made your growth about me, he continued. That's what men like I used to be do. We assume every turning point revolves around us. Mira nodded. But it doesn't. No, Jace said. Sometimes the story is better because we're not the center of it anymore. They reached her car. She paused before unlocking the door. You're not asking for credit. I've had enough of that in my life, he said. Now I'm more interested in credibility. She unlocked the door. Before she stepped in, she looked at him once more. Don't correct people for misunderstanding our story. Just live it differently. And he did, by saying nothing. The next week, Mira found herself seated across from a small panel of community leaders and education donors. The non-profit had been invited to present their updated STEM mentorship model, a program Mira had built from scratch and nurtured for nearly 2 years. She wasn't nervous, but she was focused. She wore a navy blue dress, minimal makeup, and brought nothing to prove, only something to explain. As she adjusted her notes, she saw one of the attendees, Jeff Marcus, glance across the table at another board member and whisper something. She knew that look. The I recognize her from something else look. Sure enough, when the meeting ended and hands were shaken, Jeff stepped toward her with a curious tilt of his head. You're Mira Jacobs, right? Formerly with Magnus Corp. She nodded once. Yes, I thought so. You were the one who left during that unusual restructure. Now you're here. Now I'm here, she repeated, matching his tone. Jeff smiled politely, but the message lingered between the lines. Why did someone like you end up in a place like this? What he didn't say, but what Mira had heard before, was the assumption that if you leave prestige behind, you must have lost the game. But Mira didn't feel defensive. She felt grounded. I left because I realized I was building someone else's legacy with pieces of myself they never cared to understand, she said. This space, the work I do here, lets me build something that doesn't erase me. Jeff's smile faltered. Well, sounds like purpose. She nodded. It is. Later that day, Jace stopped by with donated laptops for the upcoming beginner tech bootcamp. He walked into the office just as Mira was wrapping up a budget call. When she stepped out, she saw him placing the boxes carefully in the supply closet. She stood in the doorway, watching. You okay? He asked. I think so. He raised an eyebrow. That's a maybe. I had to remind someone today that I didn't fall. I chose a different climb. He understood immediately. I'm glad you say it like that, he said. Because I've had to unlearn the idea that your growth cost me something. What do you mean? I used to think that if you moved on and did well without me, it meant I failed. But it didn't. It meant you did what I couldn't. Which was, move forward without making it about revenge. Mira softened. You always thought there had to be a winner. I don't anymore. That night, Mira cooked dinner at home for herself. Quietly, no music, no distractions, just the steady rhythm of chopping vegetables and boiling water. She liked the way solitude felt now, earned, not forced. Midway through eating, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Kelsey. Heard from a friend that Jace is still hanging around. What's the play? Mira stared at the message, then typed back. There is no play, just presence. And he's not leading the story this time. I am. Kelsey's response was a heart emoji and a simple, that's my girl. The following Wednesday, the students at the center surprised Mira with a small thank you ceremony. They'd written notes on bright cards, stuck them to a whiteboard, and presented her, with a hand-painted frame with the words, You saw us before we saw ourselves. Mira blinked hard to hold back tears. Jace stood off to the side, arms folded, smiling quietly. He didn't try to step in or take credit. He simply helped pass out the cupcakes when it was time. Later, as they packed up the decorations, Mira looked at him. You know what you've done right these past few months? He turned toward her. What's that? You didn't try to narrate my life anymore. You stopped telling the story for both of us. I used to be addicted to control, he said. Now I'm trying to be curious instead. She nodded. Keep going. That version of you is easier to be near. They walked out to their cars under a soft drizzle. Jace looked up at the clouds and said, Funny how rain doesn't feel as heavy when you're not running from it. Mira smiled. Because you finally stopped pretending you don't get wet. He laughed. And this time, when she got into her car and drove off, she didn't feel like she was escaping or protecting herself. She felt like she had defined her story clearly enough, that even if someone misunderstood it, she wouldn't feel erased. Wednesday afternoons had become routine. Jace showed up 15 minutes early, always carrying something, laptops, extension cords, or a stack of notebooks he paid for quietly through the center's Amazon wish list. He never made a show of it, never mentioned the donations, never asked to speak to the board. He wasn't former CEO Jace Remington here. He was just Jace, the volunteer who let students lead. And Mira noticed his posture had changed. Not physically, but emotionally. He no longer held himself like someone waiting for applause. He moved with intention, not ego. That mattered. Today was a busy day. 2 new mentors were observing, and one of the foundation directors from a local scholarship program was sitting in. Mira felt the extra eyes on her, but didn't flinch. She'd built this space from scratch. Every success in the room had roots in effort, not charm. Ava was leading a demo in the back corner, walking 3 middle schoolers through basic HTML. Mira hovered nearby, but didn't interfere. Jace stood by the 3D printing table, quietly resetting filament for a jammed machine. He was wearing a plain charcoal sweater and jeans. No watch, no logo. He didn't speak unless asked. But when Amani's printer stuttered, and she sighed in frustration, he stepped in gently and said, Let's try this together, no rush. She didn't roll her eyes or shut down like she usually did. She nodded, trusting him. After the session, Mira and Jace stayed behind to break down the tables. It was already dark outside, the windows reflecting nothing but their own movement. "You've been steady," Mira said, folding a table leg with one hand and locking it in place. "That's not easy when no one's handing you a microphone." Jace chuckled. "I think I've had my fill of microphones for one lifetime." Mira looked at him. "You don't miss the power?" He considered. "Not the way I used to define it, which was being the loudest, most untouchable person in the room. And now it's about being trusted by people who owe you nothing." She stared at him for a long second. "That's a good answer," she said. "And more importantly, you didn't rush to give it." They finished packing in silence. When they stepped outside, the air was cool and damp. Spring rain hovered in the air but never fully dropped. Jace walked her to her car as always. Before she got in, he asked, "Do you remember that time in Chicago?" Mira tilted her head. "The conference trip?" He nodded. "You slept in your own room. I stayed in mine, but we met at the lobby bar that night. I remember, I wanted to tell you something that night. I almost did, but you didn't know." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I thought if I told you I cared, I wouldn't be able to unsay it. And then I'd owe you something I didn't know how to give." Mira studied him. "And now? Now I understand that love isn't a debt, it's a decision. And I made mine too late." She opened her car door. "You didn't make it too late," she said. "You just didn't know what it meant yet." He stepped back as she got in. "Drive safe," he said. She paused. "You too." Back then and now. That night, Mira lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, arms behind her head. The memories didn't haunt her anymore. They visited. And now they left when she told them to. Friday evening. The center was quiet. Most of the students had gone home hours earlier, but Mira stayed behind to finalize files for a grant proposal. The admin office smelled faintly of printer ink and jasmine tea. Soft jazz played in the background from the old Bluetooth speaker someone had donated last fall. She didn't expect company, so when she heard a light knock at the doorframe, she turned with mild surprise. Jace stood there, holding a folder. "Found this in the storage cabinet. Thought it might be something you need." Mira took it, flipping through briefly. It was Ava's attendance log for the previous summer's mentorship program. "I'd forgotten to file this," she admitted. "Thanks." He didn't step further in, didn't linger. But before he turned to leave, he said, "Can I ask you something honest?" She nodded. "Why did you never call me out publicly?" Mira looked up. "You mean back then?" "Yeah. After you left. You could have said something. To the team, to the board. You could have taken it to the press. Expose me." She leaned back slightly in her chair. "Because I didn't leave to hurt you," she said. "I left to protect myself." That was enough. Jace exhaled, looking down at his shoes. "Do you know how rare that is? I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in dignity." He nodded. "That's exactly what I didn't have back then. Not toward you, not toward myself." "You had power," she said, calmly. "You just didn't have the strength to use it in service of something greater than your image." Jace didn't flinch. "And you?" "I walked away from everything I thought I wanted. Turns out, it made room for everything I needed." The following week, Jace continued volunteering. He didn't miss a day. He showed up on time, spoke less, listened more. He helped design an organizational chart for the Student Tech Club without inserting himself into the lead role. When the students got stuck mid-project, he asked reflective questions instead of giving solutions. Mira noticed how they started turning to him, not for answers, but for steady backup. That mattered more than advice. During one session, Ava quietly pulled Mira aside. "I think he's different now," she said, arms folded, voice almost embarrassed to be hopeful. Mira studied her face. "Why do you think that?" "Because he waits now. He lets me speak first." Mira didn't offer affirmation, just a small nod. Sometimes, Ava mirrored her more than she knew. That weekend, Mira met an old college friend for lunch. Their conversation drifted to work, then relationships. The friend asked, "So, is this the same guy from that job years ago?" "Yes," Mira answered. And you trust him now? I'm learning to trust how he handles small things. That tells me more than any apology could. The friend looked skeptical. You really believe people can change that much? Mira smiled faintly. Not quickly, not without loss, and not all the way. But yes, I believe they can become more honest versions of themselves. And you? I became someone who no longer needs to be chosen to feel whole. Later that night, Mira sat at her desk, reviewing some of the center's strategic planning notes. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Jace. Not urgent, but if you ever decide to expand the mentorship program, I'd like to help with the structure, not as a donor. Just as someone learning how to support well. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked at the message for a full minute, then typed, "Help isn't about ideas, it's about consistency. Keep showing up. The rest will build when it's time." The following Wednesday, Mira arrived to find Jace already in the back classroom. He was helping two girls set up a design template for their coding project. When he saw her, he didn't rush over. He just nodded. A silent check-in, a habit formed from weeks of practice. Mira gave him a subtle nod in return. Later, when the students had left and the room was quiet, he asked her, what was the hardest part about leaving back then? She didn't pause. Waking up every morning, wondering if I imagined the bond we had, and realizing that even if I didn't, it wasn't enough to make you brave. He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry I made you question your reality." "You didn't," she said. "You confirmed how easy it was for someone else to ignore it." Then, after a long beat, "But thank you, for not needing to be forgiven before doing the work." It was Mira's first speaking engagement in nearly a year. The local university's Women in Leadership panel had extended the invitation months ago. She'd hesitated at first. It wasn't fear. It was intention. Mira didn't speak unless she had something to say that wasn't about image, reputation, or validation. This time, she did. The panel theme was, "Redefining authority when walking away is a power move." Mira read that subject line twice when she accepted. Now, as she stood behind the podium in a modest lecture hall filled with undergrads, faculty, and a few community leaders, she wore a plain blouse, navy trousers, and no expectation. Her story was no longer for them. It was hers. She opened with what the audience expected, a brief outline of her professional history, her time at Magnus Corp, the climb, the moment she walked away. But she didn't linger there. "I didn't leave because I was weak," she said. "I left because I was being slowly erased." And when you find yourself shrinking in spaces where you were meant to grow, leaving isn't quitting. It's choosing breath over suffocation. There was silence in the room. She continued, "I wasn't the loudest person at the table. I didn't play power games well, but I paid attention. And when I realized my silence had become a tool others used to benefit from, without responsibility, I picked it up and used it to walk out the door." A few heads nodded slowly. I wasn't applauded for it. Some people thought I was foolish, thought I'd thrown away opportunity. But 3 years later, I'm building something I never had when I had status, freedom. That got quiet applause. Jace was in the third row. He hadn't told her he was coming. He sat with his phone face down, eyes locked on her, not out of guilt or regret, but with full attention. He wasn't her shadow anymore. He was her witness. After the event, students gathered around. Some asked questions. Others simply said, "Thank you." Mira answered each one with honesty but not performance. She didn't package her pain into marketable sound bites. She told the truth. Later, when the room had mostly emptied, Jace approached her slowly. "You were honest," he said. "I had to be." "I'm proud of you," he added, then corrected himself. "No. I'm grateful for the version of you that told the story straight, even if it included me in the failure." Mira looked at him. "I didn't name you, but I told the part that mattered. You told it fairly." "I told it clean," she said. "Because no one gets to define me but me." He nodded. They walked out of the hall side by side. On the steps outside, a student stopped Mira, one who hadn't asked a question earlier. "Can I say something?" she asked quietly. "Of course. I was in something that looked like love, but only existed when it was convenient for him. and I kept waiting for him to say it out loud. He never did. Mira listened. I left 2 months ago. Today was the first day I stopped feeling like the one who failed. Mira's voice was steady. You didn't fail. You just stopped negotiating your worth. The student smiled, eyes glistening. Thank you. Jace stood silently nearby, hands in his coat pockets, hearing every word. That night, Mira sat in her apartment, reading over some of the messages she'd received from attendees. Most of them were heartfelt. A few were defensive. One asked why women like her were so comfortable painting men as emotionally absent. She didn't respond to that one. Not because she didn't have words, but because she no longer felt the need to explain lived experience to people determined not to understand it. Instead, she closed her laptop and opened her window, letting the cool spring air in. A few hours later, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jace. Would you be open to co-leading next month's leadership workshop for the mentorship students? I'll follow your outline. She stared at the message, then replied, You don't have to follow me. You just have to match me. Then I'm in. 2 weeks later, the mentorship workshop began with 40 high school girls, 5 volunteers, and 1 silent promise. This wasn't going to be another lecture about ambition. Mira had built the curriculum to focus on agency, emotional intelligence, and decision-making. It wasn't about grades or career paths. It was about asking the right questions and trusting yourself enough to wait for your own answers. When Jace arrived that morning, he wore a simple navy button-down, no jacket, no designer watch. He helped set up the chairs, tested the projector, and hung the handmade welcome banner the girls had painted the day before. He didn't ask Mira what his role was. He waited for her to assign it. Breakout sessions, she said. Small groups. You'll rotate. No presenting. Just listening and asking open-ended questions. He nodded. Got it. The first group circled around him hesitantly. Most of the girls knew his background. Ava had mentioned it in passing. But Jace didn't introduce himself with credentials. He sat cross-legged on the floor like everyone else. Asked, What do you believe makes someone worthy of leadership? One girl said, confidence. Another added, experience. A third said, speaking without second-guessing. Jace paused before responding. I used to think it was about how many people followed me, he said. Now I think it's about how well I show up for people who don't have to follow me at all. They nodded, quietly. He didn't elaborate. And that silence earned more trust than a monologue ever could. Mira observed from across the room. She watched him let a younger student finish his sentence after interrupting himself. Watched him nod without jumping in. Watched him match the rhythm of people still learning how to take up space. And something inside her shifted. Not affection, not attraction. Something deeper. A kind of recognition that said, I'm not managing him anymore. I'm not waiting for him to prove anything. He had become someone who didn't need supervision to act with integrity. Later in the afternoon, Mira led the group through a case study discussion. She gave the students a fictional workplace conflict, power imbalance, communication breakdown, and unresolved feelings. The characters weren't based on her past, but the girls quickly saw the resemblance. One of the students, Naya, raised her hand. Why didn't the woman say something sooner? Mira answered without hesitation, because silence often feels safer than rejection. And sometimes, we're taught that discomfort is easier to carry than clarity. Another asked, so what changed? She realized that being unseen in a connection is lonelier than being alone. Jace sat in the back, eyes steady. When the session ended, Mira packed up her materials quietly. Jace walked over, carrying the leftover handouts. You handled that question well, he said. It wasn't a hard question. It was just honest. He nodded. You're good at honesty. I had to become good at it. Nobody else was going to tell my truth for me. Jace looked down. There's something I want to give you. But I don't know if it's too late. She didn't blink. If it's a gift, it can't be late. If it's a request, it might be. He smiled at that. Neither. It's acknowledgement. He handed her a folded note. Don't read it now, he said. But I needed you to have it, without expecting anything back. She nodded. Okay. At home, Mira didn't open the note immediately. She ate dinner, did laundry, listened to a podcast, let the day settle. Then, finally, she sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the paper. It read, "I used to measure success by what I gained. Then, I met you. You didn't ask me to change. You just made it impossible to lie to myself. Thank you for walking away when I didn't deserve you. And thank you for letting me walk beside you now. Not to catch up, but to walk with respect." There was no signature. She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the old letter he had given her months ago. No comparison. Just growth, documented. That night, as she prepared for bed, Mira stood at her window and thought about how strange it was that the most important part of her story wasn't the heartbreak. It was how she rebuilt herself without needing someone else to tell her she could. And now that he stood beside her, not above her, not behind her, she didn't feel responsible for his presence. She simply allowed it. Because when you're no longer waiting to be chosen, you finally get to decide what kind of love is worth keeping near. The rain came early that morning. Light, steady, rhythmic. By noon, the clouds had broken, leaving behind a faint warmth that clung to the sidewalks. Mira stood near the front steps of the center, holding a clipboard and checking off prep items for the spring fundraiser. Tables, student displays, volunteer setup. Jace arrived right on time. Not early, not late, just dependable. He wore a lightweight jacket, sleeves rolled. No umbrella. His hair was damp at the edges, but he didn't seem to notice. "What do you need today?" he asked. Mira handed him the clipboard. "You tell me," she said. He smiled and scanned the checklist. "All right. I'll start with the AV booth. Looks like someone forgot to charge the mics. Probably me," she admitted. "I was tired last night." "Well, then we forgive ourselves and plug things in. Simple. Grounded. Shared." The day moved fast. Ava managed the welcome table. Amani walked the donors through the student exhibits. Mira floated between stations, adjusting signs, handling questions, stepping in only when needed. Jay stayed where he was most useful, quiet corners, lifting things, problem-solving tech glitches, asking students if they needed water or a break. No spotlight, no narration. He didn't hover near Mira, but she felt his presence, steady, consistent, respectful. Near the end of the event, a former student returned with her mother. They had moved out of state, but when they heard about the fundraiser, they drove back just to attend. The girl hugged Mira hard. "I tell everyone about you," she whispered. Mira blinked quickly. "Tell them good things, I hope." "The best things." Her mother approached Jace, mistaking him for the director. "You must be the one who started all this," she said kindly. He shook his head, smiling. "No, I just follow instructions well." He pointed to Mira. "She's the one who built this." The woman turned to Mira with admiration in her eyes. "You're the kind of woman I hope my daughter becomes." Mira exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "That means a lot." When the room finally emptied, Mira and Jace stood in the middle of it, surrounded by folding chairs and empty paper cups. "You were good today," she said. "I was helpful," he corrected. "Same thing." "Not always." She raised an eyebrow. "Being good used to mean being impressive," he explained. "Now I think it means being useful without being loud about it." She nodded. "That sounds like someone who understands leadership better than he used to. I had a good teacher." They walked out into the fading evening light together. No rain. Just clean pavement and a breeze that smelled like renewal. "Walk a little?" she asked. He didn't answer with words, just matched her stride. They walked in silence for a few blocks, past quiet storefronts and sleepy sidewalks. Mira didn't speak until they reached the edge of the river trail. "When I left Magnus," she said, "I didn't know what kind of life I'd be building. I just knew what I couldn't carry anymore." Jace looked at her. "Was it me?" She considered. "It wasn't you alone. It was the version of me that was shrinking to fit your silence." He stopped walking. "And now?" She turned toward him. "Now I don't shrink, and if someone can't match that, I let them pass." He stepped closer, not urgently, not with pressure, but with intention. "I'm not here to pass," he said. "I know. But I'm also not here to lead." Mira nodded. "Good. I only walk with people who understand the road goes both ways." They stood there for a while, the evening soft around them. No confessions, no promises, only presence. 3 weeks passed, not filled with declarations, not laced with uncertainty. Just steady check-ins. Jace came by the center every Friday, not to see Mira, he'd say, but to assist Ava, who was preparing a mentorship workshop for younger students. But Mira knew better, and he didn't hide it. Sometimes he'd bring coffee, sometimes just questions. One Friday she asked him to help move books into the new media room. They worked quietly, unpacking boxes and arranging shelves alphabetically. He paused midway. "You know," he said, "I used to think love was a private decision, something you hold close so no one can weaponize it." Mira glanced at him. "And now I think if you're hiding it from the person you're loving, then maybe it's not love, maybe it's control." She didn't answer, not right away. Then, "Did it take losing me to learn that?" "No," he said. "It took seeing Ava almost make the same choices." Mira stopped stacking, turned toward him. "Does that scare you?" "It humbles me." They stood across from each other, shelves of donated books between them. "You've changed," she said. "I'm trying." "That's not the same thing." "I know," he replied, "but I'd rather try and fail than pretend the past didn't matter." That weekend, she received a letter, handwritten, no signature at the end. Inside was a copy of her resignation letter from 3 years ago, and a sticky note attached. "I should have said something then. I'll spend however long you'll allow saying what I didn't." Mira didn't respond to the note, but she didn't discard it either. She placed it inside a file she kept, filled with letters from students, press clippings, grant proposals, and memories of the life she built for herself. Jace's note joined those, not because she was keeping him, but because it reminded her who she'd become after letting go. The following Thursday, Ava hosted her first workshop. Parents showed up, donors stopped by. The room buzzed with laughter and tension, and shy kids learning to code together. Mira watched from the side, arms folded, proud. Jace slipped in quietly halfway through. He didn't interrupt. He just stood at the back, nodding when Ava caught his eye. Afterward, he lingered. "I was going to leave quietly," he said. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I still have a question." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Ask." He stepped closer. No pressure, no agenda. "But if we were two strangers at a cafe, and I saw you sitting alone, reading, something brilliant, would I have a chance to introduce myself again?" She smiled softly. "Are you asking if you get a do-over?" "No. I'm asking if I get a first try, with the version of me that knows how to listen now." Mira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a mug from the volunteer table and filled it with tea. She handed it to him. "Let's sit," she said. They walked to the bench outside the building. Spring wind rustled nearby trees. Distant car horns hummed. Somewhere, a kid laughed. And Mira said simply, "You can try. But this time, I won't wait for you to decide." Jace nodded. "That's fair. Because I'm not looking for a fairy tale," she added. "I'm looking for someone who walks beside me, not behind." He took a sip, then held the mug between both hands. "Then, I better keep up." They didn't call it a second chance. They didn't define it at all. Instead, they started showing up for each other in small, quiet ways. Jace didn't try to fix her world. Mira didn't try to hold back her doubts. And when their hands brushed again, weeks later this time, neither of them pulled away. Not because it was safe, but because it was honest. Sometimes the love you were waiting for isn't the one that rescues you. It's the one that finally walks beside you at your own pace. Sometimes love doesn't fail because people stop caring. It fails because one person hides behind silence and the other carries the weight alone. But when accountability replaces apology, when presence replaces performance, and when growth happens without expectation, then two people can meet again. Not where they left off, but where they've grown to. Mira didn't need revenge. She needed clarity. And when Jace returned, not to win her, but to walk beside her, he didn't get a second chance. He got a first try with someone who would no longer wait in silence. That's the lesson. You don't always get to keep people when you're ready. You meet them where they already are, or not at all. If you've ever walked away from someone who couldn't name your worth, or if someone from your past returned, not for a redo, but to show they've grown, what did you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about trust, clarity, and timing. Because some stories don't need fixing, they need understanding. Subscribe to Romance Stories with Mr. Daniel for more real, reflective love stories grounded in dignity, growth, and truth.